specialisation in particular areas of concentration. We know what these are: high technology in computers and pharmaceuticals, in healthcare and in targeted financial services. So that Ireland became one of the major exporters of software in the world, and Ireland, despite its size, became one of the major exporters of pharmaceuticals. Others sought to emulate our example, particularly the Eastern Europeans, and for them, the success of Ireland under the Irish model was closely followed. And it was for them a spur to join and get into the European Union as quickly as possible. But now things have changed a little bit. Under the pressure of recent events in the last year, and even worse oil prices, the resonance of the desperate resonance of the subprime crisis in the United States, a slowing down of growth in Europe and the United States, the weakening of the construction sector in Ireland. We went through and are going through a very significant deceleration in our economic development. And just yesterday, or maybe the day before, the word recession has been used again, I think, the first time since 1981. So all of that happens, I should say, at a time when we have decided to vote no on a major European question. And I would quote a thing by Brendan Behan about diplomats. He said that diplomats are people who sit on the fence with their ear to the ground. But I prefer to believe that diplomats are people who sit on the fence so that they can all the more ably and generously open the gate for others to pass through. And I think you can take it that in the period ahead, Irish ambassadors, Irish diplomats, our colleagues in Europe, politicians, everyone will be very busy indeed trying to find a way forward. We take confidence from the words of the great Columba outside, that wisdom keeps welling in streams, and from the memory of Columbanus, whose great slogan was, hard work conquers all. So with a mixture of wisdom and hard toil and prayer and your contribution and cooperation, we will surmount, as the resilient Irish, the challenges of the years ahead. Thank you very much. Please, if anyone has any questions, and they're not too difficult, I'd be happy to answer them.
Ambassador, I saw some reports in the aftermath of the Lisbon Treaty result, and online there was a graph coming out of the Eurobarometer survey, and there was a clear correlation between the age of people, amongst people who had voted, that actually voted in the referendum. There was a correlation in this bar chart between age and likelihood to vote no. And surprisingly to me, the correlation was that if you were under 35, you were more likely to vote no. Over 65, most likely to vote yes. And in between, graduated between the two. Do you think that, within Ireland, the European Union has been a victim of its own success? And if so, what measures might be put in place to deal with that, particularly amongst younger voters?
Yeah, I do agree with you that the Eurobarometer poll is very, very interesting. It also shows some strange distinctions on a class basis as well, if that word is in any way acceptable today. But in relation to Dublin, it might still have a certain meaning. There is no doubt that, and I think it was even more marked among people who were under 25, not just 35. There's no doubt that a generation has grown up with no sense of hardship and perhaps no sense of the contribution that Europe has made to our economic prosperity. I mentioned that Ireland specialised in a number of key contemporary ultra-modern industries, pharmaceuticals, software and so on. And we brought in something like 500 American companies into Ireland. I served in the United States and I was ambassador in Japan during the 90s. And I can assure you that it would have been impossible for Ireland to attract the overseas investment which it attracted had it not been for our ability to say that we were acting as a member of the EU and that we were not at the edge of Europe, but right at the dynamic centre of European growth and development. We were the gateway to Europe. And maybe that's a message that we have. It's not about putting the fear of God into people, but it is a message about reality. We can easily become a peripherality if we're not careful. And the EU for us is a liberation from peripherality. And mobile international investment, where we have staked a large part of our economic future, is not patriotic and sentimental, but it goes where it thinks it gets a good deal. The good deal in Ireland has not been, by the way, low-cost productivity. It has been the investments that we made through European assistance in education, in training, in, for example, the building of 2 new universities, DCU and Limerick, the first universities built since the foundation of the Irish state. And these were built deliberately with a high-tech, computer-related emphasis and with another emphasis on job-attaining skills. But there is a message that we have to get off, and I think if you look, I'm not a politician, but if you look very carefully, you notice inevitably the certain flow and ebb of political debate in Dublin, but you'll also note that politicians are very careful. They want time to analyse precisely what happened. They know we're in a tough spot. They know that we need the European support as well to move ahead, and they have to develop a strategy, and that strategy must be aimed at convincing people who voted no, whether they're young or potentially unemployed or marginalised or whatever factors, including that whole issue about information and lack of information, and if you don't know, vote no.
Thank you for a very enjoyable and enlightening lecture. I would like to ask, some cynics might describe the European Union as a rich man's club. I would like to ask you, from your experience of Europe and European thinking, as well as seeking individual prosperity, and there's nothing wrong with that, what is European thinking at the moment, European Union thinking, as regards to the developing world? I'm thinking particularly in terms of not just increasing aid to the poor, but cancelling international debt and creating fairer structures of trade. That would be part one of my question. Part two is, as someone who has a cosmopolitan experience of life, America, Australia, Japan, and and now Switzerland and Europe. How do you see European Catholicism, if there is such a thing, influencing the very traditional church that you grew up in Ireland? Thank you very much.
Well, how would I see the Irish churches that has now developed influencing European Catholicism? That's just as interesting a question. But maybe we won't go too far into that one. But the rich man's club, I suppose it is, in a sense. I mean, there are rich countries in the world. Many of them are in Europe, the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia. The European Union is interesting on two levels if we're talking about development assistance. That it has gone out of its way to negotiate big framework agreements with countries in Africa and in the Caribbean, which give a number of trade privileges and which also accelerate the aid flow. The European community, or the Union, is the largest aid donor in the world, structured to donate long-term aid, but also emergency aid. It's on the emergency aid side that sometimes we raise questions. It also contains a number of countries which are quite extraordinary in their generosity. I'm thinking of Sweden and Denmark, but I'm also thinking of Germany. And countries such as Ireland now, quite remarkable. In 1972-73, who would have thought that we are number 5 or 6 per capita in the world in terms of our contribution to development aid? And that is because, of course, we have become a rich country. But we have become a rich country, I hope, with a conscience. And I think Irish people have a strong attachment to Africa. It has very simple origins. It goes back to our primary school and secondary school training. It goes back to the notion of the vocation for the missions. But we have a profound sensibility towards Africa. The debt question I'm not an expert in, and it's not a cop-out. As you know, there are people like Broad and our own government who are very keen on that. But Europe has a very, very strong focus on Africa. We also are focused on Bangladesh. Our approach to global warming also deals with some of the potentially and already critical issues facing countries such as Bangladesh. And when there is an emergency, even if sometimes we're slow, and that may not be our fault, as in Burma, we are very generous. So even if it is, in a way, a rich man's club, but again, that misses the point that it's a European club. I think I would prefer to call it a European club than a rich man's club, because we have just reached out and embraced the countries of Central and Eastern Europe who are not rich. We have embraced Romania and Bulgaria, who are certainly poor, and probably correlatively poorer than Ireland was in 1972 when we joined the EU. We are the countries of the Balkans, which have, in the post-war period, known ruination, terrible internecine, strife and war and genocide, have a primary position for joining the EU. That has been, at least according to some people, temporarily put on hold until the Lisbon Treaty issue is sorted out, one way or another. But the next phase of enlargement will engage the countries of the Balkans. So insofar as our neighbourhood is concerned, we are prepared to embrace poor countries through association agreements in the first stage, which involve a flow of money, and through membership in the second stage, because with membership you have to be very careful that a country doesn't become a member and collapse in consequence. Membership is a big pill to swallow. Protected industries, as we saw, including in the Republic of Ireland, can collapse within 10 years as they move into a very dynamic, competitive internal European market. And Sarkozy has recently launched the idea of a Mediterranean Union. It's been criticised somewhat in Germany, because the Germans naturally are focused on Central Europe and on the Balkans. But for the French and the Spanish and the Italians, and I think to some extent for the Irish, I could argue as well, the Mediterranean is also part of our homeland. And its welfare, its well-being, its prosperity, and its political peace, eventually, all impinge crucially on the well-being of Europe.
Thank you for your very diverse address, Ambassador. I particularly liked the reference to the Irish chieftains expressing their admiration for the way government took place in Switzerland. I too would be in great admiration of direct democracy in preference to homogeneity, gone mad as I regard Europe. I was a no campaigner when I had time. To my mind, the European Union is faltering because it is bankrupt in terms of ideology. All that we're hearing is how to get more of material wealth. As we're looking on the wall here, Querity Primum Regnum Dei, foundation of all civilization, I thought. On Tuesday night last in Dublin, I listened at the Legatus meeting to a young lady taking up from the first questioner's point, a young lady under 30 who's a Yale student of philosophy, and she is the head and founder of Youth Alliance, World Youth Alliance, and she's got 1 million members. And she fights valiantly for the values of John Paul II in both Brussels and in the United Nations. And she described in detail over an hour and a half of the enormous struggle she has against the secular humanists of both of those organisations, and how they did not represent the wishes of the youth of the world, and how it was like balm on a very troubled world, what she had to say. So I think that it's not a matter of going back and questioning and analysing what happened on the no vote. If it was done again, it would be far more strong, I should think. What we need to do now is reinvent, rethink, and take a much more considered and more scientific, develop our philosophy, our political philosophy, in the same way, analogous to the way empirical science has developed by leaps and bounds, and medicine and so on, commerce and economics. Political philosophy has stood still, in my opinion, in the last 100 years. And that needs to be developed, and the anthropological insights of John Paul II and perhaps lots of others needs to be taken on board. And Europe is only at the threshold of that prospect. Thank you.
Thank you, and that is very interesting indeed. And I can agree with a large part of what you say, and not with the no part, but with a large part of what you say. I mean, it's undoubtedly the case, whatever about my own private views and philosophy of life, that materialism can run contrary to religious observance. And it is also the case that there is a new spirituality at large in Europe. Sometimes I would say, from a strict Catholic point of view, that new spiritual expression is directing itself into ways beyond organised religion. But there is certainly an urge for people, a need for people to transcend or to defeat materialism and make their lives more meaningful. And of course, Christians will say we must do that with a Christian message. But I don't know if really we can blame the European Union for this. These are developments within ourselves, our persons, within our societies. They're nothing to do with the bureaucrats in Brussels. They're nothing to do with this disconnect that I've been talking about. In my view, I believe that we do have to remobilize Europe. I have a feeling that one of the consequences of the French and the Dutch and the Irish no, however it expresses itself in relation to the Lisbon Treaty, and I would stress an element of realism also there, that there will be an attempt, this is my own feeling and guess, to ask how can we make this European enterprise not more spiritual, because a state these days, I believe, and I would argue against a state being declared spiritual. And I don't think we want the European Union to be a spiritual entity. But it can have a moral message, and it should have an ethical message. But I believe it does have an ethical message. And to some extent, the problem with the No Yes campaign was that the Yes spent so much time dealing with a range of issues produced by the No that had nothing to do with the treaty. Please forgive me for saying it, that they didn't emphasize the ethical, overpowering message and role of the European Union in Africa. The Lisbon Treaty is designed, for all its awkward complexity and inaccessibility, to refine and streamline and secure a more human and humanitarian role for Europe within a larger 27 or 29. But I agree with you, Europe has a moderating and constructive and creative role in world affairs. It's different from China, it's different from India, it's different from the United States. And the paradox is that the Lisbon Treaty, in a way, was trying for the first time after the failure of the Constitution to look how we could express that more effectively, more cogently, and more clearly. It's true that you didn't express it in the language of the treaty. The idea was that it would so secure and streamline the working of Europe that you would express it in the post-treaty action.
Thank you for your wonderful talk, Ambassador, but I would have to disagree. I have to say with this gentleman, it's a rich man's club, and we're being forced. I think many people have said no because we're being coerced and forced into doing what the European Union wants us to do. We may have had benefits from it, that would be have that, but the way that the European is going at the moment is not a good way. And I was very interested to see that it was the young people who voted no. Quite a lot of young people voted no. But we don't believe that the Irish people were confused and didn't know what they were doing. I believe that they had great knowledge and understanding and great wisdom, and that in voting no. And I was Brian Flanagan here who said that we are now this EU is making anti-family laws, which we disagree with. And it's not humanitarian. There's always the thing that we respect one another. We're not respecting. This is anti-family laws they're making, which we disagree totally with. And people have seen the effects of the EU in their lives now, and that's what they're seeing the results of this Europe, and it's not the one that we entered in 1973. So I'm sorry, but we do not agree that it's all good, and there's many areas of it that's very bad. And no amount of talking from our government is going to tell us that unless it takes a different direction, we're not going to listen to our governments telling us to say yes to something that we don't see, that we see it has very consequences on our lives. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, and I hope you don't think that I'm speaking on behalf of the government. But I would say this, that I don't think Europe is a rich man's club, because we embrace poor countries. Poland was very poor, Slovakia was very poor, Slovenia was very poor, Hungary was very poor. All of those countries, Bulgaria and Romania, with their huge Roma populations, are very poor. They're getting massive support from Brussels. The Irish taxpayer is paying that. We are assisting in Macedonia. we're assisting in Nigeria, we're assisting in South Africa. We can do better. All of us can do better. The United States can do better. Japan can do better. I can do better in leading my life. My life is not a perfect life. I understand that fully. But we can't blame the European Union for everything that is going wrong. And I would be the first to say that the European Union is not a perfect institution. Only institutions made in heaven are ultimately perfect institutions. Those which are made by men are ultimately imperfect institutions. But everyone has the right, an absolute right, to express themselves as they wish and to believe as they wish. But I want to come back to something of the present Pope, which I think is very important. I spent quite a bit of my talk mentioning Columbanus. As you know, the present Pope is Bavarian. He's German. He's not Italian. The Italians have many saints. Some people say the Italians have too many saints. I don't know. But Columbanus is a great European saint. And we, the Irish, including Irish officials, want Columbanus to become that resourceful, that resilient, that strong, determined missionary, to become a patron of the new Europe. That is one of our goals. Maybe not as a state. Maybe as a state we cannot go in and ask, you know, the patron of Europe is Benedict, as you know. Benedict of Monte Cassino. But recently, the Pope made, quite unusually, a 3-page speech about Columbanus. This was the first time, I would say, since Gregory the Great, that any Pope has made a 3 or 4-page speech about Columbanus. So let us focus on Columbanus. Let us focus on Columkill. Let us focus on Columbanus. And let us seek in Columkill the wisdom and the vision to go forward in Europe. And let us seek in Columbanus the strength and the resilience to survive and the generosity to embrace the poor, the hurt, and the unprivileged of this world.
Ambassador Sharkey, I would like to thank you on behalf of both the College Union and everybody assembled here. The theme, the lecture you've just given is one of the lectures in the continuing series supported by the College Union and the College under the theme of culture, change and challenge. I think the lecture you've just given us has been insightful and has hit on each of those themes in turn. Thank you very much for that lecture. I think also in closing, what I'd like to do as well is to thank someone else here who has been of great help, enthusiasm and support in the development and the drive for these lectures, Father Eamon Martin, as President of St. John's College and has been President for the last 8 years at BFI, and to say thank you very much for your time and your support to the Union. I think it's appropriate at this stage to note it, in as much as that I'm sure everyone will know here that Father Martin is moving on from the college and is moving to a new post, I believe, as Executive Secretary to the Irish Bishops' Conference. We wish you very well in that, and thank you very much for everything you've done for us here. Then with just a special thanks to Pastor Sharkey and to his wife for taking the time and the effort to come here and to deliver us the lecture you've just given us. I think we could extend our time on and on here. It's obvious from the response from the floor there that it should keep on going, but I think all of these things have to come to a close. So again, Pastor Sharkey, thank you very much.
There's recording.